Thanks for watching Afternoon Live. Ready to face your fears? Our next guest is a former F-16 fighter pilot and lead solo pilot for the Thunderbirds, who is now inspiring others with the life lessons she learned in the cockpit. We welcome the author of The Flipside, How to Invert Your Perspective and Turn Fear into Your Superpower, Mace Curran. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell me about how you ended up in this profession in the first place. Did you always dream of a military career?
No, actually, people are always surprised by that because I grew up in rural northern Wisconsin, not a military family, not an aviation family. But when I got to high school, I needed a way to pay for college. And as I started to explore scholarship opportunities with my parents, the military kind of rose to the top. So I applied for an Air Force ROTC scholarship, got one, went off to college as a criminal justice major because my grand plan at like 17 years old was that I was going to do 4 years in the Air Force to pay back my scholarship time, get out, and then apply to be an FBI agent.
Oh my goodness.
Obviously, took a hard left there at some point. But halfway through college, I got to visit an Air Force base, and I actually saw two F-15s, which Portland will appreciate, taking off in full afterburner to go do a training mission. And I was completely awestruck, goosebumps, jaw drop, and I was just like, forget the FBI. I have to figure out how to go do that.
I love that. Well, you had lofty goals to begin with. You just kind of took a major pivot. So tell me about the early days as you entered this space where I imagine you were the only woman in the room a lot of times.
Yes, most of the time. When I entered into flying around 2010, about 2% of fighter pilots were women. So I was the only one in my pilot training class. And then after that, I was occasionally one of two, but often the only one. And that came with challenges. You know, it took some time to find my identity in that world and to kind of figure out how to navigate the balance of being true to myself and true to other women who would eventually follow in my footsteps, but also part of the team and, you know, developing this trust in this high performing unit with people that, you know, have to have your back in life or death situations. And it is just not easy to navigate, I'll be honest. There's like no perfect quick fix to get through that. It just takes kind of building your time and your confidence and really your competence in the career field to just prove that you deserve to be there.
Right. It's so challenging in many ways, physically and mentally and emotionally, I would imagine. Are there things like claustrophobia that you had to overcome?
Yes, that one always surprises people. The cockpit of the F-16 is very small, but even before I got to that point, I did altitude chamber training, which is that photo you see right there. It was really my first time wearing the helmet with the mask, you know, bayoneted to it. It is very much stuck to your face. And I knew I might have a little bit of claustrophobia, but I'd never really tested it. And so I'm in that altitude chamber with the entire rest of my pilot training class, just looking at everyone else's eyeballs. And they all look like they're just hanging out and relaxed. And inside, I am starting to panic. And I really feel like I'm suffocating. Like every instinct in me wants to rip that mask off my face. But I also know that I've worked really hard to get to this place where I'm going into pilot training, pursuing my dream. And if I can't deal with claustrophobia, there's no way I'm going to deal with all the other things I need to do, you know, that involve fear and pressure and stress. And so I was able to mentally talk myself off of that ledge. And it was actually a really important moment for me because I think it was the first time in my life where I was like, wait a minute. I felt very afraid, almost on the verge of panic, but I was able to control that and still decide how I was going to respond to it to serve the outcome that I wanted, which was to continue in training. And it almost was like this aha moment where I was like, wait, it's okay to feel afraid. It doesn't mean that I'm necessarily actually suffocating and going to die. Like we can step back and take an objective look at it and still move toward what our goal is.
It's such a great specific example and metaphor of you've got this obstacle and then what are you going to do, right? You can either let it totally derail you or you can figure out a way to overcome, which you obviously did. So as you grow in your career and you start to enter this Thunderbirds group, what was that process like and just being a part of, like you said, such an elite team?
So getting to the Thunderbirds happens fairly far into your career. You have to be an experienced fighter pilot. So I had already flown about 6 years in combat squadrons before I was able to apply. And the application process is pretty competitive. There's a massive paper application with all your records and letters of recommendation, and then a pretty intense interview process with the current team. So I get hired. I'm, on the top of the world. Like, this is going to happen. I find out I'm going to get to go be a solo pilot, which was also the position I wanted. And then I get there and I'm an experienced fighter pilot at that point. So I'm like kind of in that point in my career where I'm fairly confident and I feel like I know what I'm doing. And then I get there and the flying is absolutely completely different. And it is so much hands-on stick and rudder skills, and the margin for error is so small. The jets get as close as 18 inches apart. We flew at speeds just under the speed of sound, so we're talking over 600 miles an hour, only 100 feet off the ground. It is just like flying you don't do anywhere else in the military, and it is uncomfortable and honestly scary at first. And it takes a lot of exposure and time and repetition and discipline, almost like a professional athlete, to get to the point where you're ready to go out and do it in front of an audience.
Absolutely. I mean, professional athlete, I would think there's something similar in terms of keeping your body in as perfect of condition as you possibly can to withstand all those things, and for your mind to be completely locked in because you can't make a mistake.
Yeah, it's really both. The demands on your body, we would regularly pull 9 times the force of gravity. So however much people weigh, just multiply that by 9. That's how much you felt like you weighed in those moments. It's very hard on your neck, on your back, and it does take a lot of, fitness and endurance and weight training to stay at peak performance. And then the schedule is just really demanding. We were on the road almost 250 days a year. So you are constantly changing time zones in different hotels outside of your routine. And so making sure you prioritized sleep and nutrition and working out was really key to surviving in that world.
Yeah. So tell me about when you decided to take all of this great stuff that you learned and put it on paper into a book. Was it kind of hard to sift through? Where do I even begin? Because you've got so much to draw from.
Yeah, so when I first left active duty about 3.5 years ago, I started with keynote speaking. And I realized that the best way to connect with my audiences was to be very open and vulnerable about the toughest parts of my career. And that usually wasn't fearing for my life in the cockpit. It was this feeling of self-doubt and imposter syndrome and fear and, fear of failure and judgment of others. And I realized just how human of an experience that is. But the lens and the story that I had around it because of my background was just really extreme and unique. But I had so much more to share and so many more stories that I could tell and pull lessons from than I could tell in a 45-minute or a 60-minute keynote. So I had some key stories that were really the anchor of the book. But from there, I wanted to understand, what the Air Force gave me to endure those situations, what the situation themselves taught me. And then I wanted to root it all in human psychology and, look at some studies and pull from some experts because that's not my field of study. But I felt like I had experienced some really unique environments that others could learn from. And when that was all said and done, it's the book called The Flipside, and it takes these intense stories, pulls these lessons and frameworks, roots them in psychology, but really breaks it down to things that anyone can use in any career field. It is not written for other pilots.
Right. I wanted to ask you about some lessons that you share about confidence and either building it up or kind of going when you're not quite sure of yourself, like just acting first and not waiting for that confidence to come to you.
Yeah, I think there's a common misconception that confidence will build and then you will feel ready to act. And I learned again and again in my career and since that it's actually that moment of courage to take the action, even if it's small, that creates confidence. And so what I really encourage people to do is focus on the closest, easiest, smallest, slightly bold thing that they can do that moves them towards their goal. Execute that today. Like, don't hesitate because you'll get in your own way. Do that right now. Push through that, and then when you get on the other side of that, you can look back and be like, oh, I'm capable, I did that thing. And then tomorrow you can go do that again, and your threshold for what feels slightly bold raises over time. And in honestly a pretty short amount of time, months, you can look back and you will be astounded at the amount of growth you've been able to make and how much more confident you feel.
That's a great way to put it. Well, what about rehearsing like ad nauseum, whether you're talking about a combat maneuver or something you would do with the Thunderbirds? You would play that out to perfection, and we can apply that to our own lives too.
Yeah, we never went out there and were winging it. That just was not a thing, whether it was in a combat squadron where we were mission planning for an entire day or more beforehand, where we were briefing, we were running through exactly all the time slices of who would do what when. Or with the Thunderbirds, we flew that same air show again and again, and you've done it 1,000 times by the end of the year. But every new location that we would go to would have different considerations, right? Obstacles, things look different. Maybe there's tall trees, or maybe there's just no visual markers on the ground, depending where you were at. And so we would all sit around and fly through those maneuvers, mentally rehearse them. And at its most basic level, we would call that chair flying. And that was literally running through the entire mission, the entire flight in your mind before you physically went and did it. And it was a really great way to kind of give yourself that confidence that, oh, I've seen this before, I'm capable, I've done this, but also give you those reps without the time and resources and repercussions of doing it live.
Yeah, I mean, it probably sounds and feels a little bit silly the first time you're doing it, but it's such a valuable exercise.
Yeah, it does seem silly. And I do the same thing with speaking, right? I'll stand in my office and rehearse my speech, and I will imagine the audience in front of me. And so when I get on a stage, it's not like, oh my gosh, someone's actually looking at me and it's jarring. It's like, I've seen this before. I've rehearsed for this moment.
Yeah, that's how you become a total pro. Hey, thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom with us today. It was so great chatting with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Michelle's book again is Flipside. We'll have more information on our website at katu.com. We'll be right back with more Afternoon Live right after this.